Hi again, folks. So I'm back with another video again, and I'm back here to do another video about my favorite group of people these days, the Black Hebrew Israelites. Hi guys. Hope everything is okay with y'all. Okay? So I know some of you would like to just get me to shut up and stop talking about the group. But again, think about it, man. I don't wish no ill will against the group or anything like that. I just don't know why. They're fascinating to me, but it's not just them. Like I said before, I can discuss religion with just about anybody. You probably don't want to see me back in the days when I used to just go at it with Christians all the time. But the Hebrew Israelites are fascinating to me, just like the Bible is. I don't believe in the Bible, but I find it as a fascinating book. I don't ascribe to Hebrew Israelite theology, but I find what they believe to be interesting. And a lot of times it's not because of what they believe or what's necessarily in the Bible per se, but it just gives me a perspective to a world, whether it's the actual physical societal world where people live and understand why they do what they do or why they believe what they believe, but it's also what leads a group of people to think a particular way or to follow a particular path. Those things are interesting to me. Maybe I should have been a psychiatrist or psychiatrist or something along that line. Now, I didn't go to school for sociology, but I find it fascinating. I didn't go to school for history, but I find it fascinating. And I have been on this path over the past 20 years or so in relearning history or revisiting it. Because granted, we went to school and they didn't tell us much, or it's very cursive or slanted in a particular direction. And I have been able to navigate through past certain things and not to get too caught up, because by being a Christian, I was more or less in a place where people were telling me what to believe or pointing me in the direction of what I need to believe in. And because of that, and because I've given up religion and I've shoved all of that away, my brain has become extremely skeptical of a lot of things. And by being skeptical, it is also giving me an opportunity to go back and look at history as though I'm standing outside, as though I'm not from this planet. And I'm trying to keep my biases and my prejudices and everything out of the equation, and just trying to understand things on their own merit. This means things like the transatlantic slave trade. I am a product of people who came across the ocean from that transatlantic slave trade. And I'm a product of both sides. I am probably a product of those who sold people into slavery. I'm probably a product of people on the other end who were enslaving people. And I'm probably a product of people who were enslaved. So I have to stand back and look at it and try to take myself out of it, in terms of going in and looking at it as like, okay, my people were enslaved, so I hate those white people over there for doing what they did. Or my people were enslaved, I hate that African tribe over there because they enslaved people. I have to sometimes detach myself and like, all right, put myself back then, realize the way the world was back then, realize that antiquity and up into modern times and relatively modern times, the world was just a violent place. And it was conquer other people or be conquered, subject other people, subjugate them or they'll subjugate you. Just a nasty, vicious world back then. And sometimes you have to sit back and understand that's what was going on. And I know it's very easy for us to take our sense of moral superiority that we have today and then try to paint it back into an ancient world when things that we would consider abhorrible today was considered acceptable back then. But let me not get too far away for that, because that's a whole other subject. But as for the Hebrew Israelites, they didn't just pop up out of the clear blue. They did not. There are basically a subgroup of an entire movement that took place while slavery was still going on here in this country, and pretty much just outside of it. And what I mean by that, just think about it. We're black folks. Just think about back then, 200 years ago, 250 years ago. All you know is you wake up every morning and you're oppressed. Worse if you were born into slavery in whatever parts of the world it was going on in. Like, you didn't come from Africa and experience some freedom for the first 5, 10, 15, 25 years of your life and went into slavery and know what it was like to be free once upon a time. You're now on this side of the world, born into this. You wake up, you know yourself, you're already enslaved. You're growing up, you're beaten down, you're considered lower than the animals. There's no worth in you other than to be a slave to other people. You are not taught. You're not there. Your intelligence is not developed. You're just a work mule for some light-skinned people, some white people who owns this property. That's all you know. You know nothing about your history. You don't know anything about the glorious past in Africa, the great kingdoms, the great empires that were there. You know nothing of that. Just growing up, and these white people, these slave masters, seem like they are the ones who are blessed by God, and they're superior to you, or that's what they're telling you. That's what they're shoving into your face. I am supposed to subjugate you because you are not a human. You are not worthy to be on the same level as me. So just imagine just growing up with that, where you have no self-worth. You're just an animal to them, just to work, work, work. And there's no end in sight. There's no such thing as indentured servants going on here, to where you can say after 7 years you can get from on to this, buy yourself your freedom, or whatever it is. This is what you're going through collectively as a people. Needless to say, what happened eventually, though you had this group of people who were enslaved, some of them actually were able to purchase their freedom. Some of them were actually purchased by white folks with the sole intent of teaching them and freeing them. You did have some people who actually did have a heart. Well, I'm going to go down there, I'm going to buy these people. But my intent is not to enslave them. My intent is to teach them. To teach them. And see what is going on. And so, then I'll free them. So you did have enslaved Africans who were in that position. They became free. And one of the most common books, because just like the Jews of the medieval period in Europe, who were sworn off or prohibited from engaging in certain industries, they were off limits to them. That's one of the things that happened with a lot of black people. And one of the first books that a lot of black people learned how to read, those who were free or who were taught how to read, was the Bible. So they're sitting down and they're reading this book. Learning, they know how to read, and they're reading through this book. It didn't take long, or it does not take long reading into the Bible to notice these black folks. Didn't take long for them to read and get into the Bible and notice a striking parallel between what's going on with them and the ancient Israelites. This is why in those days there was a lot of talk, hymns, spirituals that were peppered with biblical themes, biblical motifs, biblical connections. And so black folks started looking at those who were learned and who taught others. They were able to look in and say, we are like those ancient Israelites, those ancient Hebrews. And you remember me telling you in the other videos about how Yahweh, the God of the Bible, or of the Jews, of the Hebrews, of the Israelites, how at one point he was this, then he was, I want to say he, I don't mean someone real, but the concept of the way people conceive them, or they perceive them, I should say. It was like he was this at one point, then he was elevated to this at another point, then he became this, and then he became that. Well, the same thing that goes on here. So initially, when black folks were looking at this, those who were learned, those who could read and taught it to other black folks, it's like, hey, you know something? We're like those Israelites in the Bible. We're enslaved. But God delivered them. If we pray, if we reach out, if we yearn to this God in this book, he would do the same thing just like us. We are like those ancient Israelites. We're enslaved. And so you'll hear songs like, go down Moses, go down to Egypt's land. Just tell him to get let my people go. But then there was a change after a while. It was like, we're like those Hebrew Israelites. We're like those Israelites back then. We can relate to their story because we're going through something similar. But then something changed along the way in the minds of some. It went from, we're not like them, we are them. We are the descendants of those very same people. So where it could have been slavery in the Bible with the Israelites was one story, one thing. The transatlantic slave trade was a different thing that had nothing to do with each other. Eventually came to have something to do with each other by carefully going through the Bible and finding passages that seem to imply that what enslaved Africans endured coming from Africa was predicted and prophesied in the Bible. So now we can clearly go ahead now and say, see, we're one just like those people back then. Not that that was fulfilled in a time long past, those curses and whatever else. And I'm going to talk about Deuteronomy chapter 28 anyway, at least the things in there that I can look at and say, well, this proves what Hebrew Israelites may think in the bottom line. But it was like now, all of a sudden, well, look at what those ancient Israelites went through and what we're going through today. It's a continuum of a prophecy, of predictions that we're still being cursed, instead of, well, this is what they said in the Bible, the whole plot, the whole prediction, this is what happened, end of story, that's long past, that's done, that's gone. No, Hebrew Israelites still think that there's a continuation of that, or a different incarnation of that in the transatlantic slave trade and everything bad that went along with it. So once that started happening now, then it changed from we're just like them to we are them. This is one of the reasons why in 1896, during the Battle of Adwa in Ethiopia, between Ethiopia or the Ethiopian kingdom, under, I think it was Menelik. Was it Menelik? I think it was under Menelik. And his war against the Italians, who were trying to take over his country and be like the other European nations where they could grab a chunk of Africa. Of course, they had another thing coming, because the Ethiopians valiantly stood up, defended their kingdom, and drove the Italians out. But when that battle took place, news of the victory of the Ethiopians spread around the world. It eventually got to the ears of black people, oppressed, enslaved in other parts of the world. It eventually got to their ears, and they found out, wait a minute, an African kingdom defeated the mighty Italian Empire, defeated the Europeans? Well, you know something? We're probably not as bad as they claim that we are. We're not as weak as they claim as we are. We're not as illiterate as they said that we are. Because people that look like us on the other side of the world, from a continent where our people came from, defeated the Italians. And that resonated. And that basically gave rise to what we call Ethiopianism. Coupled with the whole thing of black people on this side of the world also feeling as though they are the Israelites or descendants of those ancient Israelites. Putting all this together and wrapping it up all together. Then of course you had then the birth of the Nation of Islam. And if you look, you'll find some common themes between all of these movements. More or less where black people can lift themselves up and feel proud. Not listening to what white people say we are, but we can declare who we are to them. And what better way than to go ahead and feel an air of superiority. Again, an evolution from this down, all the way down here. We're nothing, we're trash, we're whatever, to, hey, we're like those people in the Bible, you know. We're like those people in the Bible too. We are those people in the Bible. And those people in the Bible says they're going to be reigning over all the other nations. They're the apple of God's eyes. These are God's special people. So, I feel special. I feel good about myself. I feel better about myself. And now I can look down my noses at those heathens, those evil white people, those evil Jews, those imposter Jews. I am better than them. I feel an air of superiority about who I am because my God is the God of that Bible. The great God of the Bible. That's who our God is. Nobody else's God. It's our God. Which is what and I should point this out. Obviously, if that's what Hebrew Israelites want to believe and that's their God, by all means, they are free to do so. For all I know, I may be completely wrong to think that they may be monotheistic in the sense of saying this is the only true God and no other gods exist. Maybe they may, I've never looked into that. Maybe they may feel like, yeah, sure, you can have your God, you can have your God. Maybe they look at it like the ancient Israelites did. Have your God, but this is our God over here. This is our special God over here. We don't care nothing about yours. I don't know. Never really looked into it, never really asked them. And I'm sure someone in the comment section will probably come and make mention of that. But anyway, that's part of what I wanted to talk about today. And I think I'm going to leave it at that, because at some point in time I'm going to actually discuss Deuteronomy chapter 28, particular verses. Because the whole thing about it is in the Hebrew Israelite theology, they believe that entire chapter is talking about black folks. At least, depending on who you're speaking to, which group you're speaking to, certain black folks, or maybe it might be all black folks. But there's certain passages in there that basically turn the theology on its head. Again, that's just me discussing the Bible and perhaps their view on it, and that would be what I'm discussing. That would have nothing to do with whether or not a Hebrew Israelite want to remain a Hebrew Israelite, be a Hebrew Israelite. Again, that's their right. They're by all means right to do that if they want to do that. My only thing is I just hope it makes them better people. And I'm sure there are wonderful Hebrew Israelites who walk among us every day. Because again, I know I generally talk about those that I've met in New York City, that I've seen in New York City, and they tend to be rather aggressive in how they speak, what they say. And we know that there were some of them that up in New Jersey a few years ago that actually killed someone. So it can lead to some violence sometimes, This does not mean this is how all Hebrew Israelites are, or they're representative of the entire, the various groups. You know, you always have your renegades and groups and so forth, you know? But I'm sure there are also, like I mentioned, there's a congregation in Atlanta that I used to associate with. I never went there, you know, but they seem to be rather laid back. They just believe whatever they believed, and, you know, they weren't really on street corners with bullhorns or whatever, yelling at people walking by or getting into things with people. So I know you have those congregations also, and I'm sure some of those people from congregations like that actually pop in here to watch these videos. And the other interesting thing is, just to show you how the groups can have differences, there's some of them who come in here, some people who've come in and say, don't pay attention to those you hear in New York City. More or less kind of like saying they're not representative of the rest of us. And then you have others who are like, well, we only take the Old Testament as the scripture. The New Testament we don't follow, or we don't believe that. Then you have other groups, because I have heard the groups in New York using the New Testament verses to also prove some of their points. So just there alone you have differences. Anyway, I guess I'll do another video. And I guess I'll get around to Deuteronomy chapter 28, because I'm always told, read that, and I guess it's going to transform my life. But I read it 4 times before, and I see it every now and again. It doesn't do anything for me at this point. So until the next video, guys, thank you for tuning in. I certainly appreciate it. Certainly appreciate the comments and the audience that I get here. I certainly appreciate it. You guys take care. Until the next video. Bye.